All
Wait,
right.
Roy?
Yeah, I know. Hi, everybody. We're on. Welcome back. We're here for another one of your questions about work. And our guest and I were just talking about the miracle of how people mess up each other's names, including mine, which is only 3 letters. And if you're here for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. And this is where we take your questions about work. And it's really rare that we have, say this without, I guess burning your ears, Zeynep, a genuine scholar here. Zeynep Tan is a professor at MIT. She runs the Good Jobs Institute. She's the president of the Good Jobs Institute, which does something very rare for, and you can correct me if I've misunderstood this, for a place housed in an academic institution, which it really helps its partners to figure out how to do the things that she researches as a scholar. And her book, which is just out, is The Case for Good Jobs, based, building on years of work around ideas we'll talk about. And so, Zeynep, the question that we have today is, if I'm a CEO or I'm leading a team, I have power over some things in my workplace and not others. What does it mean for me to offer a good job to the people who work for me? And how do I do that without, while having a successful business, without breaking the bank? And we just love any guidance, and thank you.
Yeah, first, thank you for having me, Roy. And your question, there are multiple questions in there.
I know, I always like that.
What does it mean to offer a good job? A good job means different things to different people. You and I might think about a sense of belonging, recognition, achievement, put different weights on a good job. But let me say, for all leaders, one of the things that they should really take into account when they think about whether they offer a good job or not is the minimum requirement for a good job. Are we meeting that? And that minimum requirement is, are we paying people high enough so that they can take control over their lives, so that they can have a stable life, so they can put food on the table, so they can sleep at nights, so that, they're not dealing with trade-offs all the time. So paying high enough so that people can take control over their lives is a minimum condition that leaders must meet in order to offer a good job.
And let me just ask about that. I feel like maybe I've seen this in some of your research, but one of the things I've seen in large organizations is that people, particularly if they're managers of managers, let alone if you're the CEO of a large organization, that understanding what the lived experience is like of the entry-level people who work in your company may just be difficult for them. Like, to really picture, I don't know, what a call center employee's life is like given what you pay them may be difficult. And so how does one gain empathy, and how does one assess whether one is hitting that bar that you're describing?
Yeah, I think one of the things is to look at real data. Put surveys aside, but look at the take-home pay that your frontline employees are making, and compare that to the living wage in the areas in which they live. So that's a very direct way of seeing whether they're making ends meet or not. But the way to gain empathy, Roy, is to spend as much time as possible in the front lines. Jim Sinegal, the co-founder of Costco.
Yeah, one of your heroes in the book, I know.
Yeah, and when he used to run Costco, he used to spend 200 days in the stores. He's not doing this just to be nice. He's learning about workers. He's learning about work. He's learning about customers, what works, what doesn't work. So one of the best ways to gain empathy and to drive performance is to spend time in the front lines, to learn about work, to learn about workers, to learn about the customers.
I want to zoom out to asking about the how, but just because we're on it and it's so vivid, it's easy for me to imagine that in a retail environment. Yeah. And many of the examples in the book are retail environments. In a knowledge work environment, particularly one where there may be a hybrid workplace now, where, folks are working from home. I mean, how do I spend, how does that look in different industries and different styles of work?
Look, when leaders want to do something, they can find very creative things to do it. Right. I think it's just a matter of whether you prioritize this or not.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so that then gets to the how, which is, of course, there are many things, I participated in. I know you have done many of these Good Jobs groups. I did one, the Good Jobs Champions, which was great, with Aspen Institute and Families and Workers Fund and others. And they talked about all these elements of a good job, including voice and pay, of course, self-determination. You list in the book some excuses of why companies say they can't do it. Oh, it's the market condition. This is just what the wage is. So what are some of the reasons you hear for why people can't do it? And how do you feel about why they can?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that for generations, leaders have been taught that market pay is the right pay.
Right.
Because labor is just another input to production, and therefore we must pay market wages. And lean and mean is what drives efficiency. So this type of thinking drives a lot of the low pay and bad jobs. And one of the things that we keep telling companies, you mentioned Good Jobs Institute, it has become a lab where we apply the academic research into companies. One of the most surprising aspects has been how much low pay costs companies, right? It is really expensive to operate with low pay. One, of course, workers can't focus on the job. They can't do a good job. They're less productive. But low pay is one of the biggest drivers of turnover. We've seen organization after organization. We've observed turnover levels from 30% to 400%. And the direct cost of turnover alone, hiring the people, onboarding them, training them, time to full productivity, can be huge. Again, we've observed, 10 to 25% of total dollars spent on payroll, but those turnover costs are small compared to lost sales, lower productivity, all the mistakes, errors, poor customer service, waste that results from low turnover. Again, I'll give the Costco as an example. Jim Sinegal tells my students, every year they ask, how are you able to pay double what what others are paying? And they started this from day one when they started their first store. And he says, 70 cents of every dollar we spend to run our company goes to people. If you don't do that well, because this is a people business, you're going to mess up your company pretty badly. And I've seen the million ways in which, companies are messed up when they operate with low pay and high turnover.
So one of the other things I learned, I'm a failed economist, but one of the things I learned along the way was, the efficient markets hypothesis in the public market, whether strong, weak, whatever, but just generally this idea that if something helps you competitively as a business, then everybody ought to be doing it. And so if I put on my skeptic hat for a second, I'm sure you've heard this 1,000 times, like, okay, that's cool, Costco. Walmart has this different model, and Walmart seems to be a much more successful business than Costco. And so I guess there's two questions in there. One is, why does it seem that competitors often win with a strategy that is maybe not a good job strategy? And the other is, if it is true that this is just the winning way to do business, is it just that people haven't realized it yet? Like, why hasn't it changed yet?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about the leaders who have been, lack of imagination. They can't imagine any other way because market pay is the right pay. And our emphasis on using data to make decisions and companies operating in silos make it even harder to imagine a system change sometimes.
Right.
And some things are easier than others. The playbook for the good job strategy and good jobs, the good job strategy that I talk about, Roy, is not just about higher pay. If you look at Costco, if you look at Mercadona, numerous other companies I've studied, pay is just one component. It's a necessary component, but it is about winning with your customers. Like, what does it take to win with your customers?
Right. You talk about airlines doing customer-centric thinking.
Yeah, it's the customer-centric thinking. And you need to have a great team that's set up to succeed. So you need the great team, and you need the secret sauce of the good job strategy is to make choices to increase the productivity, contribution of employees and set them up for success. Since you mentioned Walmart, I'll just say something about that. So one of the companies that we work with at Good Jobs Institute is Sam's Club. And Sam's Club,
which folks may not know, part of Walmart, right?
It's part of Walmart. And they have made tremendous improvement in the jobs that they offer, in the productivity of their workers, and they are now winning with their customers. If you look at them 6 years ago, they were lagging behind Costco, but since then they have made huge pay investments, huge technology investments. They redesigned the work that their employees do, and now they're winning with their customers, and their employee turnover is 25% lower than what it was before, and they changed the lives of tens of thousands of workers.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hear you about lack of imagination, and I really don't believe that these ideas propagate and that you can make changes even in the context of organizations that are not necessarily seen that way. There's another point of view, which is that if we depend on the goodwill of managers or the enlightened self-interest, not goodwill, the enlightened self-interest, which I think what you're appealing to, of managers and CEOs, that there are limited conditions where they can do it at best. many of the examples you give in the book, I mean, as a startup investor, I just see founder-led businesses where the founder has moral authority to do things where the analysis may be ambiguous without risking losing their job is somewhat easier. But the other thing people sometimes say, well, actually, why don't I stop on that for a second and ask you about founder-led companies? Is it different in a founder-led company?
It's easier in a founder-led company, right?
Yeah.
For a CEO who has just come to run a different business, they usually have a short tenure. The tenures have been shrinking over time, and they are under tremendous performance pressure, and there are easier and faster ways to increase performance.
That's right.
And some of those ways are more legitimate in the eyes of their investors and board. I'm totally with you. And the leaders who have been able to adopt the good job system had tremendous courage and conviction.
And also from early days, I noticed in many of your examples that it was baked into not every example, but that in many examples, it was baked into the entire, it's not just about the job. It's about this whole operating system for the business that includes the nature of the job, but also communication systems and brand and all kinds of other stuff.
Yes, but system change is a lot less risky than we may realize. That's what I've learned during the last 6 years working hand in hand with companies. And I'll go to Sam's Club example since we gave that already. When I met John Furner, who had just become the CEO of Sam's Club, he told me, look, Costco has had 2 CEOs since they started in 1983. I'm Sam's Club's 14th CEO. So imagine the performance pressure he's under. He's going to be there for just a few years. But during those few years, he ended up starting the system change in a very smart way because he realized he can't win with customers without having a competent team, without having that team set up for success. But I'll get back to, do we need these leaders? And I will say, Roy, we have a big societal problem of tens of millions of people who have been left behind in this great country of ours. And I don't think that business leaders alone could solve this problem. Government, policy, labor, academic institutions, we all have to play a part in making change. But I also don't think that we can solve this problem without business leaders. Because
100% agreed. I mean, as you know,
wages, labor could have more power, minimum wages can increase. All of these things are good things, but you can still design the work for interchangeable parts. I mean, remember the auto industry in 1980s, right? The pay was high, workers had power, but the job was a terrible job in some ways because people couldn't use their heads, they couldn't use their minds, and it was little in dignity.
And I think one of the things that shifts is that how people, on some level, somebody said this to me, because I think at Apple, they teach a course on how to have good jobs. And they said, somebody involved with it said to me, on some level, a good job is defined by the person in the job. And therefore, that will change with time. And the culture around it will change. One of the ways in which I see it, self-determination, for example, ability to exercise creativity, these things can become more important. I do think, as you know, I believe that the role of organized worker power in many businesses may be essential because actually the workers organized may be more powerful than the CEO in a lot of cases, who sees themselves as a creature of, legal and financial constraint. The other question to me is about the introduction of technology, especially now as we all think about AI in the workplace. In what ways do you see, oftentimes the questions around people, leadership, and jobs are about 2 factors of production, labor and capital, but particularly technology intersecting. And we had Darren Asimoglu, your colleague, for another event talking about this. How does technology play into this?
It depends on how we use it, right? It depends on whether we use technology, the social technology that Darren talks about, to just substitute labor, or if we use technology to be able to empower people to increase productivity so we can offer better jobs. Again, I'll come to Sam's Club as an example. Sam's Club's ability to use smart technologies enabled them to increase productivity, pay their workers $5 to $7 an hour more from a basis of $15 an hour, and make the job a better job because now workers are doing more value-added tasks. They can serve the customer so much better. So it's not like what technology does to us. It's a matter of how we use our imagination to use technology to drive customer value, to improve productivity, and to make the job a better job.
I think that word imagination is just so central. and I'm just going to put in one of the comments we got here on LinkedIn from Brian about no substitute for putting yourself in the position of your employees and customers. Just trying to do, to me, one of the fuels for imagination is empathy. Is the more you can see what it's like for the other person, the more you start to realize, oh, if every time I think about introducing technology, it's like a substitute for a person, and you get these so-so technologies like self-checkout at retail that are actually in some ways worse for the customer experience, which is, then you get one outcome. And I call those looms because it's like a spinning loom, it replaces a person. And if you instead try to think, how can I use technology to empower my people? I call that a crane, because a crane, you can do something with a crane that you couldn't do otherwise. You get a totally different outcome. And it is amazing how narrow the imaginative range is. We see this with startups too, where every season we get 50 of the same startups pitched to us. That's not because it's the right answer at that point in time. It's because imagination is a copycat kind of a thing often. And it's the other guy did it, that sort of thing.
And so that imagination, we should practice for every decision, not just technology decisions. When you're introducing a new product, a new service, the first question to ask is, how does this improve value for the customer? How does this affect the work that frontlines do? How does it enable the frontlines to serve the customer well? That's the systems view that's required to be able to win with your customers through a good job system. And that's what, I try to explain as clearly as possible.
I think the book does a great job of it. And I apologize. I should have said this to you beforehand, but I come from an immigrant family where we express love by interrupting each other. So, this kind of, we're both talking at the same time works well for me. And thank you for bearing with it.
I'm the same way.
Okay, good. And I'll just say, I think, I would put up this URL where people can get the book. And whoop, there it is. And, for me, one of the reasons to read this book is it makes an argument. But another reason is it's fuel for imagination. Is it helps you think, how could it be different? How could I frame the argument differently? How can I try something? And especially at a time when the world has thrown us so many curveballs, I think in a way you are underlining that leaders have more power than they may realize. And that feels like a joyous thing at a time when you're begging people to come back in the office and they don't want to, or whatever it is. So I really appreciate the positivity.
Thank you so much. And from a $60 billion Sam's Club to 2 units of a restaurant, Mo's Original Barbecue, we have seen how meaningful it was for leaders to be able to improve their performance and change the lives of their employees.
I love that.
So,
I love that.
So there's not just imagination, a ton of data in the book.
I love it. Well. Any parting thoughts before we wrap?
Well, I hope this encourages more leaders to read the book and then to adopt it in their organizations. It's
Me
good
too.
for
and I'll just say,
it's good for the world.
You, unlike many other people who have some argument to make and a platform for it and success in your own career, one of the things I've respected from afar is you seem to run your life with a discipline that suggests to me that you yourself have a good job of prioritizing, time as needed with, sorry, my phone is ringing here. It's prioritizing time as needed on the real priorities of life. And so I just want to commend that, because being a personal role model in trying to make this argument also matters a lot for leaders. If they want others to have a good job, they can't run themselves into the ground either. So thank you for that. And for those of you who are here for the first time, the reason we say it's not advice, well, Zeynep is in a position where she can give it, but mostly advice is about the giver, not about the receiver. And so we're offering perspectives on what works. And if it works for you in your situation, great. And if you have other questions, we, oftentimes take the questions from what people share with us. Feel free to reach out. And Zeynep, I hope you'll come back. And thank you very much for all the work you've done.
Thank you so much for having me, Roy.
All right, to be continued.